Today we sit down with Dr. Michael Housman. Michael is not just an AI expert, he's a trailblazer in the world of data and artificial intelligence. A self-proclaimed data nerd with over a decade of experience, Michael was shaping AI long before it became mainstream.
My kind of superpower is making these very technical concepts accessible to lay people, using analogies. It's almost like cartoony and it animates the idea, but it gets the point across.
Now he travels the world delivering captivating keynotes on the hottest topics in AI, from organizational adoption to the balance between human and machine decision-making.
I think AI is going to be built into almost everything that we do. In some cases, it's a ChatGPT where you're interacting with it, but in most cases, it's under the hood. You're just going to see applications getting smarter and smarter, predicting your next move, kind of understanding your behavior, and you probably won't even know how it's getting so intuitive, but the truth is, it's AI kind of working under the hood.
Renowned for making AI accessible and engaging, Michael bridges the gap between cutting-edge tech and real-world impact. Enjoy! Michael, let's talk data.
Sounds good.
So the world changed in November 2022 quite considerably. ChatGPT basically became an overnight phenomenon and household name overnight. Now, I know in your world, it's been slightly different because you've been talking about this a lot longer, since 2022. So could you just dive into, your self-proclaimed data nerd? How did your data journey start ultimately, and what changes have you seen in the space?
Yeah. So it's funny. It's funny that it's become the sexy topic, because 15 years ago, I got my PhD in 2009 in econometrics, and I joked that it wasn't sexy. Like it was very boring. I was a data nerd back then. I liked building models. I was doing it in an econ program. I got a PhD in econ. And I had the opportunity to go into academia, which is one path. But I thought at this time, I had some intuition. I didn't know AI would blow up like it has. But I thought, hey, this data is going to be really valuable, and it's going to allow companies to derive insights, to create a ton of value. And so rather than that, for me, that was a big turning point in my career. Rather than going to academia, I said, I think I'm going to join the startup world. I'm going to join the industry. I had some very unpleasant conversations with my thesis advisors because I don't think they were exactly thrilled with that decision. But then I spent the following, frankly, the next decade working with data, leading data science teams at startups across a variety of industries. I did work in HR technology, helping to build hiring algorithms. I worked in financial services to identify fraudulent loan applications, to issue consumer and small business loans. And so, that was the next decade was me just being a builder, relearning model building, but in a different language with Python, and learning how to lead teams and working with data engineers, and just learning a lot of the technical stuff I never got out of my PhD program. And then finally, I'll bring you to the present day, which is 7 years ago, I got on the radar of a company called Singularity, and they teach executives about exponential change in technology. And they thought I wouldn't be terrible at speaking. A friend of mine said, hey, you should do this. You should get in front of audiences. I did it. I wasn't terrible. They decided to bring me back, and I started doing that. And I was doing it once a month, and it was a fun side hustle. And then, like you said, Emma, November 2022, that side hustle just blew up. And one talk a month turned into 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 a month. And at some point, I just said, I think I'm meant to be doing this. And I quit my full-time gig building technology for a startup. And I decided I'm going to, kind of become speaker / builder, right? And I can elaborate more on that. But anyhow, to your original point, it really has been fascinating to see from someone who's been doing this for 15 years. It's very weird to see all of a sudden when the whole world focuses attention on your thing, and what you do is all of a sudden the exciting topic du jour. It's a weird feeling, because now you have a lot of people piling in that haven't been doing this for very long, which is scary. But it's also exciting that the data nerds, at the end of the day, it's like Revenge of the Nerds. Like we kind of we won out, right?
It's your time to shine. Yeah, I imagine your family and friends were like, oh, I don't really know what you do, some kind of data tech thing. And now they're like, you're cool. You've got all the answers. Tell me everything about AI.
Totally. Yeah, it's weird. All my dad knew forever was I'm in computers, right? It was just computers, right? And now he's getting on ChatGPT, and so he's kind of reaching out to me. I have friends who never, ever, ever took an interest in what I did. I was just like the dorky PhD guy. And they're reaching out now and they're saying, hey, my business, I'm in entertainment, I'm in law, I'm in accounting. We need to start leveraging AI. Let's hop on a call. And so it's really fun, to be able to help friends and above all, to kind of have them take an interest in this stuff that I do. So yeah, it's been an amazing kind of run.
Brilliant. And have you had to change how you talk about it? Because before you were, I suppose, in technical circles, technical speak. And now, like you said, the whole world's interested, but maybe they don't have that technical acumen. Have you changed how you deliver when you're talking about it?
I would. So yes and no, I haven't changed, but I would say my sweet spot, my kind of superpower is making these very technical concepts accessible to lay people. Like that's the niche that I fill. There are technical folks that speak on technical stages and I can do that. But the truth is I'm a normal guy. And so I can take these complex concepts and relay them to business leaders and people with non-technical backgrounds using analogies and lots of, slideware that, it's almost like cartoony and it animates the idea, but it gets the point across. And so, yeah, I kind of speak, I'm bilingual. I speak two languages and I speak to data scientists and data engineers and data nerds like myself. I can speak, I build in Python every day and I've, done all sorts of data work, but when I'm not speaking to them, I've learned you have to speak to business leaders a very different way. And frankly, it's good you bring that up. That's a skill that not many data scientists and technicians have. And it's so valuable. Is like abstract all the math. How does this solve a problem? How can you get someone to engage with the material? You can see when their eyes glaze over, you start talking about, these kind of recursion and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden you lose them. So you've got to be able to kind of keep the audience engaged. That's just first and foremost.
I agree. I think in today's modern data world, to get ahead in a data career, you can't just be technical. You do have to develop those soft skills. And I say develop because they might have not come naturally to you in the beginning. But if you can't get that buy-in from the wider business, that as soon as you use certain jargon, the audience is just disengaged and they're like, sorry, what?
Yeah, 100%. And in many cases, I get to be the translator. Like in many cases, I'll be brought in because you have a technical team that's very proficient, but they don't speak business. You have a business team that just can't really communicate and understand the technical team. And so in many cases, it's like I have a number of like interim/fractional CTO gigs where all I'm doing is speaking, kind of translating from one party to the other and making sure that they kind of understand how the other side of the organization speaks. So yeah, I think to your point, in terms of talent, if you're a technician, you want to be developing those technical chops, but you really, try explaining it to your dad, try explaining it to your sister, like get it to, see if you can get them to understand a concept without having their eyes glaze over where they're just like thinking about, whatever they saw on TikTok the other day. So,
absolutely. And in terms of AI then, because everyone wants to jump on the bandwagon, as we know, and there's amazing possibilities out there with what we can achieve, but ultimately you need to get the fundamentals right. And the fundamentals in data aren't as sexy as AI. So is this a reoccurring theme that you see in the space?
Yeah, I mean, that 100%. I'd say I kind of tell people like you kind of have to eat your veggies right before you get your dessert. The nice thing is with the off-the-shelf tools, with tools like ChatGPT and a lot of these off-the-shelf tools that are SaaS-based, you can actually get some value. You don't even need to have your data in any sort of decent shape to actually get value out of many of these tools. They don't need to be connected to your data, and they can help you be more productive at your job. And I think that's the magic of, the ChatGPTs and the image generators and all the different tools. But it doesn't eliminate the need to go on that data journey. And so what I tell people all the time is you're going to go on, I call it this AI journey that we're going to craft your roadmap, but it's two different journeys. One is low hanging fruit, incremental improvements. How can I take off the shelf tools, put them in your employees' hands and supercharge them? Meanwhile, we're going to go on a data journey and it's never fun. It's not sexy. And by the way, everyone comes to me and they say, but my data is in terrible shape. And I told him I've never worked with a company that came to me and said, our data is perfect and we're ready to rock and roll. Like, it's just, every company has that. They're all embarrassed. It's like the data, the garage that no one wants to talk about, where there's stuff piling up and it's terrible. But it's so key when you go on that data journey. I'm just finishing up with actually a UK-based company called Pet Lab, and there was a whole re-architecture and data, there was all this data homework, and it's taken a year and a half, 2 years to go on that journey. But the truth is, now that we've completed that re-architecture work and we've cleaned their house, they can sprint so much faster. They were running into issues. Things were breaking everywhere. The platform was falling apart under the weight of their customers. It literally just wouldn't handle more customers, and they were growing so fast. And I said, hey, we're going to have to we're going to have to redo stuff you've already built, but we're going to build it in a more robust way. I use house analogies. Like, you built this house, but it's falling apart. And we're going to have to go room by room. We're going to rebuild the foundation. And it's going to seem silly because you want to build more rooms and more structures and build it higher, but you're just going to have to rebuild stuff. But once you do that, you're going to be able to build a skyscraper. And that's what they're doing, right? They're sprinting right now, and they're the largest pet supplement company in the world. And there's no breakage, there's no issues. Everyone loves working in this beautiful, elegant platform. So anyhow, long answer to your question, but that data journey is so key. When you do that the right way, it's so amazing to see what it unlocks.
Yeah, so you've got to go slow to go fast in the beginning. So would you, I know it's hard because it depends on the company, the size, whether they're the infancy or later on in maturity of data strategy. But on average, how long do you think it takes to get to that point where you can start sprinting?
Yeah, it really does depend. Is it a technology company where data is at the core of everything they do? How much data maintenance and hygiene have they been doing versus just stashing it in a NoSQL or a MySQL database and just worrying about it later? So, I like to tell companies, look, I think you start to see some of the value. If you think about it like working out, like you work out for a day, you don't look at the mirror and say, oh my God, I've been transformed. I would say you need to be, you'd probably need, not unlike working out, you probably need 6 months to a year to start to see some of the value. And then when you do it for, in the case of that company I mentioned, I thought it would take a year because of delays and because they have to operate their business. You can't just shut the business down and re-architect everything. So it actually ended up taking 2 years, so twice as long as we thought, which is not ideal. But frankly, they're almost done. And done doesn't mean you get to pay zero attention. You just get to do more hygiene, right? But yeah, I would say 6 months is kind of the minimum before you're going to be able to extract some of the value that you've created.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think some companies fall down with the appointment of a CDO, for example, or a data leader, because they expect results a lot quicker than that. Because they're investing a ton of money, maybe they've already done it from a technology perspective. Is that something you see as well? Yeah,
I think businesses can tend to be very impatient. And so you're right. I think when they make that investment and they hire a CDO, they're looking for, they are kind of looking for the cheats and the quick wins. And look, there are ways to deliver value early in the journey if you pick the projects right. But it is a long-term kind of journey, right? It takes many months, in some cases, years. And so you have to be patient. You have to stay the course. And, there's only so much that just hiring a CDO, I think that's one of those, in that workout analogy, that's one of those magical fixes or supplements. Hey, I hired a personal trainer. Why am I not seeing results? It's only been a month. And it's no. That's half the battle. You have to be, I say to everyone, it's to see any sort of change, personal, organizational, it's you have to take action, be consistent, and find smart people, find mentors, find coaches, find people who know how to do the work.
Yeah, 100%. And we all know it's people, process, technology, but often it's not the some companies go technology first, which isn't always the right approach, but technology doesn't necessarily let the business down. It can be the people side, because I don't just mean the data team. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm saying that the whole organization hasn't gone on that cultural shift, that journey together. And is that something you see as well?
Oh yeah, 100%. I tell everyone, it's another kind of line I deliver, which is, technology is easy. People are hard. Like changing behavior and routines is really challenging. I'll give you an example. I'll give you two actually. One, I did hiring algorithms early in my career and we would go to hiring managers with 20 years of experience and we give them these algorithmic scores and say, listen, for this job applicant who scored green over yellow or red, because it's stoplight, colored. Hire the green. They're going to stay longer and perform better. I could show with dozens of graphs and charts and reports and all my data science that it worked when they followed it. But getting a hiring manager to trust your score versus their 20-year intuition is incredibly hard. They either ignored the scores because they didn't even know it was there, right? Because they were just in the habit of doing their job, or they willfully ignored the scores. They said, I don't care, egghead, how long you've been doing this. Like, I trust my intuition. And I did not anticipate that in my career. I thought you just hand people data, and I'm a data scientist, and they just use it the way you would expect. But changing those behaviors is really challenging. And it's true. So yeah, I'll tell people often when these things fail, it's typically not because the technology, didn't live up to its promise. It's because people didn't lean into it. They didn't adopt it. They didn't start leveraging this in their day-to-day jobs. And it's because changing routines is the hardest thing on earth. And that's the challenge we all face.
So what's the best way of getting the whole business on board then? Is it, for example, a data literacy program, or is it something different?
Yeah, I think first is demystifying this. I was just on a call earlier with a company where they said, hey, we've got a lot of interest. Everyone's, but we don't know where to begin. And everyone's coming from different levels of knowledge and fluency with AI. And so typically what I said is, listen, we're going to do some due diligence to kind of gather intel about your company, but we're going to do a workshop and it's going to be an all day. Company's going to invest the time to have everyone participate in this. And the first thing we're going to do is just teach them about AI and get everyone to the same level where they're having the same kind of working language and knowledge of AI. And so that's typically, I do those all day long, and that's me getting people excited, showcasing like, how could this change the world? What are the foundational models that you need to be aware of? Will this take your jobs? No, this is actually going to replace a lot of the more mundane parts of your job. It's going to let you do the stuff that's more creative and strategic. And so, yeah, I'd say to your point, Emma, first, that literacy, making sure everyone's has the same foundation, they're using the same language, and making sure they're not scared of this thing, right, is the first step. And then once you've gotten to that point, we take it to the next level, which is, let me show you some amazing applications that you can use right now that are going to make you love your job even more. And so we start to show you some tips and tricks and tools that you maybe didn't, it could be ChatGPT or could be others that, are game changers, that are eye opening. And let me get you really excited about this. And so for me, that's the starting point, to get the company so that they have what's called an AI mindset, right? Where they're thinking, hey, I have to do a task. Wait, is there a way that AI can help me do this better, faster, cheaper than I would have done it on my own?
Yeah. Why do you think we're so worried about it taking our jobs? Do you think the media is playing a big part in that, like scaremongering?
It could. I think it's media. Could be, because it's just easy to get clicks and eyeballs when you scare the bejesus out of people. I think, and this is a fun conversation. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think AI in particular scares us in a way that internet technology, social media, mobile, like none of that did, because I think it cuts at what makes us uniquely human. Like it starts to, when you think about it, like what separates us from all the other organisms on Earth, it's this big brain that we have that's capable of doing all this cognitive work. And now we're slowly partitioning out, like, oh, I can see things and I can say what that is. No. Algorithms can now diagnose breast cancer better. And you're like, okay, but I can interpret language and communication in ways that but now algorithms are really, really good at communicating in language. And so anyhow, my theory is, because that's what we think of, that's our identity. It's like we're the smartest things on this planet, except now there are different algorithms that are getting as smart, or in some cases smarter than us. It makes us fearful for like, what's our role in this planet? Like who are we going to be if these algorithms can do our jobs better and they these smarter life forms, right, on this planet. I'd be curious your thoughts. Like, what do you think makes people shut down and fear algorithms?
I think it's two things. I think ultimately, yeah, there is a threat for the reason you described, because we're used to being the most sophisticated on the planet in terms of our cognitive ability. But I think the other side is the fear of the unknown, because whenever people say that, I think they're the people that haven't really delved into what AI is. They haven't really used it. They've just heard it somewhere. And then it's like, oh, we'll just repeat what that person said. It's going to take our jobs. So I think the people that use that are the people probably not in the space as much as say you and I, because I also think it's just going to drive efficiency. Like I hate boring tasks, like so much more than the average person. Like I run away from admin. So for me, it's just made my life easier so I can do things like this, the human connection. But I think people who think it's going to take the jobs is probably because they just don't know too much about it. And I do think there are still barriers in place, because I think a lot of people don't even know what AI stands for, like artificial intelligence. Again, we're in the space, we're always talking this talk, but I do think the media plays a part in it as well. And I do think the average person probably doesn't have access to ChatGPT. I mean, I don't know, do you know how many users worldwide are using it as a percentage? Have you got any data around that?
So I don't know the number of users, but I will say this, I often do a poll of my audience when I get in front of people and I'm like, hey, what are we working with? Who's leaned into these technologies? And typically with technology adoption, you have a bell curve, and people are shocked. We're 3 years into this journey, really, 2 years into this journey, and still less than half of the audience has leaned into, has used ChatGPT. Like there are a lot, like you'd be shocked. A lot of people. You and I, it's a daily thing, but it's amazing to me. And so I think there's a big disconnect between the, super users and super adopters and frankly, the majority of the population that's like tested. I'd say the majority have either not touched it, or they played with it once because they're kid or their niece said, hey, you should check this thing out. And they were like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then they discarded it. And they didn't think, oh, this is something I could use. So that's what we talk about. Like the technology is advancing at an insane pace, but I'm not seeing a big shift in behavior. And these things it's going to take, it's like, 2000 with the internet. Like it's back then, no one was on the internet. Like it was very, very kind of rare. And it just takes decades for people to get on board with this is the new way of doing things.
Yeah, you're right. And then in terms of your career then, like we said, after November 2022, things changed for you quite considerably because suddenly you were so in demand as a keynote speaker. So how many are you doing a year now? And I believe it's now your full-time occupation pretty much, which is super cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. I do almost 60 a year, which is crazy. And I'd say it's like half international, half US. So I'm on the road a ton. It's a little sad because I have a girlfriend and she has a few kids. I don't get to see them nearly as much as I would like to, but I'm very privileged. Next week, I'm flying to Geneva. I'm going to be presenting to the UN. Like it's insane, kind of my life, the weird turn that it's taken. And by the way, half my time is speaking, keynoting, evangelizing. Typically companies will grab me as I'm coming off stage and they'll say, hey, can you help me on my journey? And so I still have a foot in that builder camp, right? And I have data engineers and data scientists, and I have great project managers. I have a team that kind of runs itself where I'm still able to be involved and weigh in when necessary. But yeah, it's probably more the speaking and I can speak to like that's a skill set in and of itself. We spoke about it earlier. Like being able to do that is very different than being able to build and understand AI.
Absolutely. I mean, I can talk, but I don't want to be on stage talking. That is a goal of mine, trust me. But I did my first public speaking this year and my mouth was so dry. It was like stuck together and like my hands were shaking. And when I was telling people like, oh, you're good at talking, you don't get nervous. I'm like, yeah, I do. In front of a room of people, suddenly my body takes over and I like all these weird sensations. And it's like, how did you get over that? Like, did you have those nerves prior? Like now I know you're a pretty avid speaker, but in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I think you do very well on podcasts. You would be great on stage. However, it takes a lot of muscle. Like I still get those nerves, by the way, and it's a good thing. A friend of mine who's a psychologist said, listen, the nerves are a good thing because it shows you care, right? If you didn't care and you weren't feeling that pressure, that means you've kind of like, you've checked out and you're just like, oh, this is like, day-to-day ho-hum. But yeah, I did hit a point. I used to get very, very, very nervous, and I just kind of kept doing it. And I kept going back to the well and kept going on stage. And then at some point, I don't know, it sort of kicked in that I could slow down. I would speak too fast, and I would just try to speed through the material, trying to get to the end, because that's how you get done, right? It's like you just get to the end. And then I don't know what happened. There was a couple talks where all of a sudden I just felt really comfortable in the space. I was like in a headspace where I love the material. Like the fact that we get to work in AI and this is the sexiest thing, we should all feel blessed. You, me and anyone else who's doing this stuff. And then B, I loved once I kind of felt like I was engaging the audience and I could feel them leaning in. I felt like, okay, now I was getting the feedback that I really wanted. And then just doing that over and over again, in this case, like hundreds of times now, I just got to the point where I kind of broke through the nerves, and I still feel nerves when I go on stage, but now it's more excitement. It's like everything I do day to day, and, love podcasts, love calls, love, all that stuff. But all of that is leading up to when I get to go on stage and I get to like perform and kind of do what I think, I was in a weird way, like put on this earth to do, is kind of be a communicator.
Amazing. And in those keynotes, do you have creative freedom in terms of what you're delivering? Or is there any element of script, or we want you to talk about this specific thing? Or does it depend on the event?
Yeah, it depends. At every event I do, there's a pre-briefing. They will kind of give me some amount of background in terms of, hey, this is how we want you to customize this for our audience. We want you to focus on, I was just on a call where they want us to focus on marketing and commercial kind of applications, and it's a sports league. There's the one with the UN, they want me to think about a little bit more government, how governments can engage with these tools. So yeah, there's always some amount, probably 10-15% gets changed from talk to talk, but the core talk track is something I've developed from years of doing this. And honestly, it started off pretty terrible. I get feedback scores after almost every talk I give. And so I know how well or poorly I do. I'm amazed. Initially, I was not that great at it and the content didn't resonate, but it was like a comedian. As long as I could keep going back to the well, I could keep testing bits and I could see the reaction and I'd see the feedback scores and I'd see it get better and better. And yeah, the last thing I'll say is, for anyone that's aspiring to do this, I think of it, look, I approached it initially like I was here to teach, almost like a college lecturer. And then I realized if you lose someone's attention, like you're here to inspire, you're here to engage, especially with a keynote. Like they can go to online courses all day long, but they really want to have their mind blown by a keynote. And so your job in the case of a keynote is first and foremost to engage, and you're fighting attention spans, which are shorter and shorter these days. And that means, like, if someone tunes out, you've lost them. Nothing else you say can be relevant. So you need to find ways to engage them. And often that's, you can tell stories. I do a lot of live demos, bring the excitement, bring the energy. But for me, that's the most important thing is like, how do I, and for me, it's easy with a topic like AI because it hits on so many emotional cues. We're scared, we're excited, but you need to engage that audience first. Otherwise, nothing else you say really matters at all.
Yeah, fair play. And fair play for taking on that feedback. Because I think if I went on stage and people said you weren't very good, I'd be like, okay, that's it. I was right. I'm not made for this. I'm never doing it again.
I'll tell you, the best was the first one I gave it for Singularity. That talk, my tryout went well. And then they put me on a program with, it was a Deloitte program. So it's a big consulting company. I flew to New York. It was my first time doing this. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I went, and there was someone else who presented alongside me, who remained in English, and he was just really flat and kind of boring. And I was like, okay, at least I won't do as badly as that guy. I delivered my content. Again, it was not good at all. And now in retrospect, I made a zillion mistakes. I got the feedback scores, and he and I were tied for last place amongst the speakers, like literally neck and neck. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I was like, I can't believe I did that bad. It was an interesting, but inexplicably, they decided to give me another shot and they put me out in front of more programs. And so that for me, it's humbling, but it's also, I realized that was rock bottom. I got like a 3.6 out of 5. It was like a C at best, but I'm the sort of guy where if you give me more cuts at the plate, I'm going to get better and better. And I take a lot of pride in that. And so I'm always, now, the scores are almost, tens across the board. I'm very proud that I've gotten to that point, but it's years of work.
Fair play. And taking on board feedback, that is a skill in itself, isn't it? Because some people just fundamentally disagree with the feedback they get and carry on doing as they've always done. But if you do that, you're never going to develop. But I do think that is a skill in itself.
Yeah, 100%. And I that's something because I can tend to be a little unemotional and robotic. I joke that I'm like half man and half machine. And so I'm very much like my dad is super logical and analytical. And so I'm proud that I can read those comments, and sometimes they can be harsh. Sometimes they'll be like, I didn't like how his tie looked, or he dressed kind of funny. But the truth is I can take it very dispassionately and read and look for the common threads and say, this isn't them critiquing me as a person. This is them critiquing me as my speaking style, my speaking persona. And it's that feedback, has been invaluable. And when they say, hey, I need more stories, we need more anecdotes, or I need more this and that, I hear it enough, I'll make the adjustment. I'll make the adjustment in the next talk and see how the scores change. And that's how you get better and better at doing anything. It's like you have to put yourself out of your own body and say, okay, as a dispassionate third-party observer, like what does someone think of this that I'm delivering?
Yeah, take the emotion out of the equation. Not take things so personally. And then in terms of, obviously, you're captivating audiences, you've got the UN, government, private sector, healthcare, no doubt, marketing. Is there any particular industry that you're personally most excited about from an AI perspective?
Yeah, I think there's so much opportunity here. I think I'm going to be doing some work with, I will say this, I've been doing work with oil and gas, and it's fascinating to think about how they think about safety and risk. And so for me, when you can tie the work that you do to literally like lives saved, right? There's all sorts of safety issues that they have to navigate. They have to be looking for all sorts of hazardous situations, right? There's very little margin for error. But for me, when you can tie kind of the work you do to like, no, there are literally human beings, or like autonomous driving, it's something I feel very passionate about. And we're pretty much at the later stages of that. But when you talk about humanoid robots could replace people in very dangerous jobs, I think that's amazing that we're going to save lives. Aircrafts have, airlines have gotten safer and safer the last 100 years to the point where accidents just, we've gotten exponentially safer. We're going to see humans, people walking the earth now because autonomous cars will save lives. And so for me, that's the ultimate metric of like, one thing is ChatGPT saves you and I time because we don't have to write up, a position description that we didn't want to. But when you can tie it back to like people, quality of life or their lives themselves being saved, that's amazing, right? That's such a huge impact.
100%. Have you been in an autonomous, I can't ever say that word, autonomous. Have you been in a vehicle before, like a self-driving one? Because I think I'd freak out.
Yeah, it's funny. I put my money where my mouth is. I just moved to San Antonio and I bought a Tesla. And because it has self-driving capabilities, and I know folks have some opinions about Tesla and Elon, but the truth is I use self-drive every day. Look, let's be honest. I'm not a great driver. I don't love driving. It's not a skill set that I like take a lot of pride in. So I put on that self-drive almost all the time. And it's a little scary, but it drives a little bit defensively, which is probably for the best. It's not aggressive by any means, but I know from the stats and for myself, this thing is better at driving than me, and it's not going to be distracted. It's constantly, there are thousands of sensors that are pulling in data, and human beings just get distracted. I get a text from my girlfriend, whatever it is. So yeah, it's free. To your point. When you first get in one of those cars and the wheel is turning on its own and you're not doing anything, there's a party that's like, I put my hands in the life of this machine. Like I put my life in the hands of this machine. I hope it does the right thing. It's scary.
Yeah, it's the fear of the unknown again, but if the data is there to back it up, which tells you it's safer, then naturally you're going to start to feel more comfortable. So generally, do you just sit back in your car then? Just sit back and relax?
Yeah, I get it a little bit on, I get it pointed in the right direction. I key in where do I want to go, and then I turn on the self-drive and I sit back. Now and Tesla enforces, you have to pay attention. So side note, this is kind of off topic, but if you start looking at your passenger or you're looking at the console because you want to get your music set up, if you do that for too long, it says, hey, take control, like pay attention to me. And if you don't do that, it'll shut off. And it just says, you know what, like you're on your own. So good for them that they force you, like you have to sit, you have to look forward and have your hands on the steering wheel or it'll shut off.
Right, so you can't be having a nap.
Yes, exactly. Much as I would like to, because I'm running around like crazy. But yes, you have to be ready at all times to take control. And who knows? I think 5 years from now, I think these things will be safe enough that you can sit in the back seat and do work. But we're not there yet, right? Now they're still testing them out. They're still using human feedback.
Yeah. How many of these vehicles do you see on the streets in the US on average, would you say? Because they're not mainstream by any stretch in the UK. I don't think I've ever seen one, to be honest.
Really? Oh my God.
I've seen Teslas, but I don't know if they're self-driving, of course.
Yeah. You'll see in San Francisco, you see the cars because they have Waymos and they have the devices on top. They have a LiDAR detector. God, you'll see them almost every time you get on the roads. You'll see one of those like self-driving cars, especially Waymo. They're blowing up now. They've eaten into Uber and Lyft as a percent of kind of ride sharing. So
wow.
And they've expanded from San Francisco. I was starting to see them in Austin when I moved in November. I was seeing probably once every time I got out and rode in an Uber or a Lyft, I would see a Waymo somewhere along the way. So yeah, they're big. I'm surprised it's not big in the UK, but I'm sure, look, I don't know if you'll get there. And it's also like very crowded city. I think it's a little, it's probably slower to adopt and get them out there. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's an ever-changing landscape, of course, but in terms of like the future, and it's hard to predict because I understand that it's moving so quickly, but what predictions do you have about AI that you could share with us? How do you think the world is going to differ?
Yeah, I mean, the one I always say is people don't realize technology moves exponentially. It doesn't move linearly. Moore's law, the number of chips we can fit on a transistor doubles every 18 months. We're seeing that it's actually more like 6 months for GPUs. But the point is, like DeepSeek just came out and they basically wrecked GPT-4 and they did it on, I don't even know, 1/10, 1/20th of the budget. And people are freaking out and they're saying, hey, how did this happen? This is insane. And I'm not saying I predicted that, but I have been saying from the get-go, technology moves exponentially. Like we're going to see this thing moves faster and faster and faster. And so that's number one is like wherever you think we're going to be in 5 years, we're going to be way further than that. Number two is because technology moves that fast, the human piece is what is the bottleneck. Because like we talked about, human behavior, human routines, changing humans in general is really slow and clunky. And so I think that technology is going to sprint ahead, but I think organizational adoption, I think the speed with which you see that in applications we're using day to day is going to be super, super slow. And I think where the real opportunity is helping companies leverage the tools and getting people on board and bought in. So for me, those are the two big ones. As far as more nitty gritty stuff, I think you're going to see more humanoid robots out there doing work. You're going to see many more self-driving cars on the roads in the very near future. I think AI is going to be built into almost everything that we do. In some cases, it's a ChatGPT where you're interacting with it, but in most cases, it's under the hood. You're just going to see applications getting smarter and smarter, predicting your next move, kind of understanding your behavior, and you probably won't even know how it's getting so intuitive. But the truth is, it's AI kind of working under the hood. So yeah, those are the big ones for me.
Amazing. And how about companies that don't adopt AI, who don't ride the wave? Do you think fundamentally they're not going to exist in the next few years? Maybe not few years, but maybe 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I got this question recently because, and I would say, I don't think it's like hey, you're going to go out of business next year, but I think your time horizon is about right. 5 to 10 years, you're going to slowly become more and more inefficient, unable to compete. Your competitors are going to be able to do what they do, but at a much lower cost basis. And eventually, yeah, I mean, I like to use the analogies like in 2000, not many companies thought, hey, we need a website. But if you didn't lean into these technologies by 2005 or 2010, you probably realize like, oh crap, like this internet thing isn't a fad. We probably do need a website. We need technology to allow consumers to engage with us. So yeah, I think companies can't afford to stand on the sidelines. No one wants to be the first. No one wants to be the last. But I think I tell everyone, I'm kind of saying, beating the same drum. Now is the time to start. And it doesn't mean massive re-architecture, but it means start experimenting, start exploring, start teaching your people. This isn't going away, right? This is the internet in 2000. This is social media in 2010. Like now's the time.
Do you think there's going to be an anti-AI movement? And what I mean by that is not just AI, but what's becoming more popular, I know in Europe, is like digital detoxes, like businesses where they're like, you can't come here and use technology. So there's like reading cafes, and people are now going on these health retreats where they can't take their phone or their laptop. So I wonder if it's just going to become an exaggerated version of that, where people are just like, no, I'm really saying I'm switching off altogether from the digital world.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, because I think there's already an anti-AI movement and that everyone's very concerned about the risks of AGI, about privacy, about security. But separate from that, yeah, I do wonder, I think it's unquestionable it's made our lives better. It's saved us huge amounts of time. I do wonder, does it leave us feeling more connected or less connected, right? And more present in the moment, or does it take us out of the moment? And so I do think, kind of to your point, we're going to start seeing movements where people realize like, hey, maybe this is good. This helps us do the things we want to do, but we should also try to be intentional. We should try to be present in the moment. We should try to connect with people authentically and not use any technology tools. And so, yeah, I think we're likely, here's a good example of like, there in Austin, on dating, if you look at the data, all of a sudden everyone's dating using apps. Like the way people meet, over 50% of partners meet through apps. But in Austin, there's almost an anti-app movement where people are sick of the apps. And so I have friends that are running in person, like old school meeting events, like speed dating and like intentional, hey, let's cook together, or let's, go to a cold plunge together. And it feels like that's a reaction to, we're sick of doing this technology thing that leaves us feeling a little bit empty inside. And so I think you're right. You're probably going to see more people say, you know what, like, let's leave the phones at home. Let's connect with each other that in a way that doesn't require any technology at all. So yeah, I'm on board with that. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah. I think so. I read an article, I can't remember which dating app it was, but they're bringing out something, and they may already be doing it. It's like essentially having a wing woman or wing man in your pocket, where AI comes up with the first line to start, to someone, and like the answer, but it's like, come on, like maybe because you're a phone and you're young and you're like, oh my God, what should I say back to that message? You get people involved, but getting AI to tell you what to say to a guy or girl, it just seems so inauthentic. I don't know if it's taken off or not, or I don't know if for those reasons people are like, do you know what, this is not for me.
Yeah. I mean, there's something similar in the US. The funny thing is, I once upon a time experimented with something similar. I was like playing with large language models and starting, but the truth is like, I think, it could probably help. In fact, I'd seen some data to suggest that maybe at least it gets past that initial like inertia of not knowing what to say. But at the end of the day, like, are you going to have a relationship with someone where you're constantly checking your phone, figuring out what to say next? Like, the true you is going to shine for better or for worse. And so I think, that's a good instance of we need to get away from our dependence of technology and just like go and rely on whatever it is, between your ears. Like go and just say what's on your mind.
Yeah, 100%. And I always like to ask data people this, because you mentioned before being a data scientist, you'd give data to a hiring manager, for example, and they just ignored it and went with their gut. And you're like, why? How much for your decisions do you rely on data, or do you use intuition and past experience, or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, probably a bit of both. Look, I try to, like I said, I try to be pretty dispassionate and analytical when it comes to making decisions. When the data is available, like the speaking feedback, like I have some intuition as to what's working and what's not, because I can read the audience. I can see when they're looking at their cell phones. And so I feel like I can respond to that. But when there's data available that's given to me where people say, hey, this worked, this didn't, I absolutely use the data. The problem is, in many cases, they're saying with wellness, health and wellness and fitness. Like I wear, my Apple Watch, it's giving me feedback on my activity. And so I absolutely use that whenever I can. The problem is like in most decisions on a day-to-day basis, you kind of don't have a ton of data to refer to, right? And you're just kind of like, a lot of times we have heuristics and rules of thumb and we just have to shoot from the hip. But yeah, I think best practice is both when you can get that data.
Yeah, no doubt. And then in the staffing world, which is my world, there's a lot of criticism around AI from a scanning CV perspective. I'm sure you've heard of this. I mean, I've spoken to hiring managers that like, oh yeah, I don't need to use you. I use AI to check resumes or whatever. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that sounds efficient, but then you're missing like key elements, that draw you to someone, because everybody's hired, say, a wild card that on paper maybe weren't going to fit the brief, but just something about that individual, they were like, yeah, you've achieved this, you've gone through that hardship, whatever it was. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we did research on this because I literally built hiring algorithms. And what we found was that human plus machine outperformed either one alone. And we may at some point reach the point where machines are better, but there are things that humans can pick up on that machines wouldn't necessarily from a resume. And so I do think that using both is probably the best. And, I'll use a kind of funny anecdote, which is we did work for a temporary employment agency, and they did tons of hiring. It's one of the biggest in the U.S. So they were making all sorts of, temp and perm placements. And we would ask the recruiter, they were like, you have to do an in-person interview for anyone we place has to come into an office and interview in person. And we thought, hey, that's efficient and time consuming. Like, why would you require that? Can't you just do a Zoom or just let the algorithm decide? And they said, you know what? There are intangibles that you can pick up from talking to someone in person. One of the best examples, she was like, sometimes you just sit there across the desk and sometimes they smell kind of funny and you can tell. And that's not something you'd be able to pick up on in a Zoom. So, I do think there's value in the human review, but that humans should be, when they have an assessment or an algorithm that's nudging them in a certain direction, like use it. That's more information that's going to produce a better result.
Yeah, absolutely. So human and machine, best combination.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the world we're living in now, so it makes sense. So we're going to move on to the quick fire data lightning round.
Oh, man. Okay.
Prepare yourself.
Yeah.
What is one common misconception about data that you'd like to debunk?
One common misconception. I would say that I'd say people think that it's like a side dish, like it's the foundation for all of your AI. So it's absolutely foundational. It's core. It's not something that, and it's not a one shot in the arm thing. It's like a constant journey. So I would say kind of like the fitness journey. It's like you got to keep going back. Like you have to keep working at it. It takes consistency. It's not like, we're going to engage in some project and be done. So
yeah, it's a full-time commitment.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Number 2, name a book, event, or podcast that you think every data enthusiast should explore.
Oh, man. You know what I always loved, and this is a little old school, but Freakonomics has always been an amazing one for me, which is like dispelling kind of things that people think in really clever ways using data, like using data to approach a subject and land at a maybe unexpected conclusion. And I love that they do that. It's storytelling with data, which is frankly what I do. So yeah, I really love, it's been around forever, but that was, for me, I like that because that inspired me to get into this space and to do what I do.
Amazing. Freakonomics, great name as well. So is that a book or podcast?
Yeah, it's both. It's a book. Stephen Dubner and Stephen Levitt, one's a journalist, one's a University of Chicago professor, and they collaborate on, it's a set of books now, and they have a podcast. I've been on the podcast. I was very fortunate to be invited. But yeah, I'm a huge fan. If anyone hasn't heard of them, please check them out. They're amazing.
I will do. And what about an event, given you've been to a fair few? So you've been around. So which event would be the best, would you say?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't go to as many industry conferences. You know what? There's like, what was it? Data science. Well, that's more of a data science congress, data science conference. What would be a really good one? I'm going to Mobile World Congress in March. I'm trying to think, oh, you know what? I'll just put this out there. South by Southwest is an amazing experience because beyond data is great, but like South by Southwest is a really interesting combination of its culture, its art, its technology. And so I think it plays in a fascinating space, and it doesn't focus specifically on data, but it talks about kind of how our world is changing, and it really attacks that from a few different angles. So go to South by Southwest. I recommend.
And data underpins a lot of things now, doesn't it? Although even if from the technical aspect, everyday lives, data is almost everywhere and everything. So even if you don't know it's related to it. So no, that's a good example. What piece of advice would you give to someone just starting a career in data?
You're naturally going to enhance those technical skills, and you're going to learn how to work with data. You're going to learn all the tools, but those technologies change over time. And what won't change is the need to be able to communicate and kind of help relay that to non-technical folks. So for me, that's the skill set you're always going to need. I mean, look, there are eggheads that are just pure technicians and they do just fine. But I think the folks that have the most robust and interesting careers learn the non-technical skills as kind of obsessively as they did the technical piece. And so that for me is like, learn how to convey this to non-technical people. That's a skill set that you really, really need to cultivate. And most people don't really value it. They don't really spend the time and energy there.
Yeah, I think it's important saying developing and practicing, because it's one of those things like people will go, I can't go to yoga because I'm not flexible. Well, yeah, if you go to yoga, then you'll become more flexible. But it's one of those, they're like, oh, I'm not a communicator. I'm not this, I'm not that. And they label themselves as they're not something. But like we said, I can say I'm not a public speaker, but I can develop skills to get there. So how would you encourage someone then to become better in the craft of communication?
Yeah. So here's the good news is there are a zillion opportunities. You have non-technical friends, you have family, you have folks that probably have some curiosity about what you do, but they don't really want to get into the technical weeds of it, right? They don't want you to be talking about, MySQL databases and AWS configurations. But if they ask you like, how's work? Try to explain what you're doing to any non-technical person in a way that doesn't cause them to nod off. And just pay attention. Are they engaged? Are they asking questions? Are they kind of like, oh, okay, that's cool. How is everything else going? And the good news is you get opportunities to do that every day because everyone's constantly asking you, like, how are you? How are things? So I would just use that as an opportunity to kind of hone those skills and to explain this stuff and to make it more accessible. So that's a good starting point to see if you can do that.
Yeah, give it a shot, and you may be surprised. You might just be interested.
Totally. Yeah. Who knows? My dad now is asking me a little bit about ChatGPT, and I never expected that to happen. Amazing.
Love that. Number 4, finish this sentence. Data is the key to.
Oh man, data is the key to creating sustained value for the company.
Like it. Smashed it. Well done. And the last one, what is a data buzzword that you want to erase from the data dictionary, if there is one?
Oh, man. Yeah, the one that I just hear about constantly is like data governance is the thing that, look, at the end of the day, it's important to have policies in place that kind of oversee how we think about data, how we handle our data. But I don't know why. I don't know. It just, for some reason, that word governance, it just seems to have appeared in every conference and every event now talks about data governance. And I'm just like, and I'm all, it's almost, I don't know why it annoys me. I know it represents something important, but there's got to be a better word, I don't know what
I think so. Well, there's AI governance as well. I just think that word is not sexy. If we're talking about AI being a sexy word, governance is certainly not one. So we should maybe think about how we could rename it to make it a little bit more appealing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's just the word governance. It seems like I imagine bureaucrats like in suits sitting in a room and saying, no, you can't do that. And so that to me is what governance means. And like, that's why, I don't know. And it seems like their job is to stymie what I try to do, which is to use the data to create value and to come up with creative ways of using it. So, there's got to be a non-bureaucratic word that we could use. I'm going to come up with something and we're going to pilot it.
Have a think,
for sure.
And we'll cross that one out for now.
You got it. Sounds good.
Thank you. You've been amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really fun. So thanks for reaching out. Yeah, this is great.
Thank you so much.